Oh,
Yes, welcome.
fantastic. Oh, it's just 7 o'clock. Fantastic. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. So tonight we're talking about imposter syndrome and what it is and how you can overcome it. Just to let you know that everyone's screen is turned off and you are all muted. So please don't worry about being recorded or anything like that, and just be comfortable sitting down or lying down and just tune into Joan tonight. If you have any questions at all whilst we are going through the session today, please just pop it in the Q&A box, and we'll take all your questions towards the end of the session after Joan's talk. So now we have Joan Perry with us. Many of you already probably know Joan. Joan has won numerous awards for speaking different topics about psychology and coaching. I met Joan through one of his really popular talks called Coaching on Life's Big Questions in January through a friend called Andrea, and it was just amazing. Many of us, not just myself, but many of the audience, just the chat function was just super busy with all the questions and the feedback. So I thought John would be a great speaker to invite to this You Are Not Alone and Mental Health Summit. And John very kindly has accepted the invitation. Hello, John.
Hi, thanks so much for your invitation and for your introduction.
No problem. Would you like to, I know you have the slides just to talk us through a little bit more about the imposter syndrome today, but would you like to maybe introduce yourself a little bit further to the audience, please?
Sure. So I'm John, and until fairly recently, I was a lecturer at Southampton University, but I actually took early retirement a few months ago, so I'm now entirely freelance. And I work as a coach and as a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist and also as a workshop facilitator. And I've got a particular interest in stress and stress management, but also, as was said, in existentialism and life's big questions, and increasingly on this topic, which we're going to look at today, which is imposter syndrome and the crucial difference between self-worth and self-esteem, which we'll be exploring this evening.
Well, that sounds fantastic, Joan. And so we already have some people just putting in the chat. Oh, from Joy. I know Joy. Hello, Joy. Joy here from the UK. Yes, please do just pop it in the chat where you are tuning in from today. We'd love to hear. So on Saturday, from our first session, we had someone from Jerusalem. So yeah, I'm just really curious where all of you are joining from. Oh, just noticed that probably your default setting is to panelist. Please do change that to panelist and attendees. So attendees can also see where you are coming from. So we have Joy from the UK, Margarita from Southampton. Hello, Margarita. Nikki from Berkshire, and Emmy from UK. Maya from London, Steve from Milton Keynes, Fran from London, and Ron from Milan. Ah, brilliant. From everywhere. Thank you everyone for joining us. And if that's okay with you, Joan, I'll pass it over to you so that you can start your talk on imposter syndrome, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very kind. So just give me 1 second. I'll get my slides up, hopefully.
Thank you.
There we are. Okay, so this is the topic for this evening, imposter syndrome. And I'm very happy to say also that I'll share my slides at the end of it. And if you want to take notes as I talk, then by all means do, if that's your preferred way of learning. But if you prefer to take notice and just sit back and relax, then that's fine as well, because I'm very happy to share my slides and to share them in full. So you'll get those if you want them later. So in terms of imposter syndrome, actually, before I go any further, it might be useful just to say that I intend to talk for only around 30-35 minutes to allow plenty of time for questions and discussion afterwards. The good news is if you identify as somebody with imposter syndrome, then actually it's generally held to be a sign of intelligence. And I really love this quote from Bertrand Russell: "The fundamental cause of trouble in the world today is the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt." So take heart if you experience imposter syndrome. It's a sign of intelligence. First recognized in the late 1970s by Professor Clance and Imes at Georgia State University. And it's a feeling, imposter syndrome, that many people have, of kind of being a fraud, of not being quite as clever as people think they are, of being successful through luck or chance rather than through their own efforts or merit. But also a sense that any minute now you're about to get found out. Any minute now people are going to discover you're nowhere near as clever as they think that you are. And a sense, therefore, of kind of anxiety, and particularly anxiety in terms of the position that you've achieved and your right to be there. The best evidence is typically, but not always, it affects women more than men, but also people from humble origins, typically more than those from more privileged backgrounds. There is a reverse to imposter syndrome, which is often referred to now as the entitlement syndrome. And that tends to go along with people from more privileged backgrounds who kind of assume the right to certain positions, whereas people from more humble origins tend to actually feel that somehow they've joined a club they don't fully belong to, and that at any time they might be exposed as not really belonging or deserving their position. A lot of work in this area has suggested that typically people who experience imposter syndrome, a big part of that is because they prioritize the pursuit of self-esteem, which has to be earned, over self-worth, which is innate. And so that's what we're going to focus on for a large part of this talk this evening, which self-esteem is, of course, contingent. We boost our self-esteem by doing good work, by being top of the class, by winning the race, by achieving our target weight. Whatever it is, the goals we set ourselves, when we achieve these goals, our self-esteem goes up. The problem with that, of course, is that we don't always experience success in life, and we don't always actually achieve the goals that we might set ourselves. And then inevitably, if our pursuit is of self-esteem, our self-esteem has to take a dip. And so therefore, the antidote to self-esteem is self-acceptance or self-worth, which is recognizing that you're born worthwhile and you're born okay. And these are not qualities you have to earn at all. They are actually your birthright. And building a secure sense of self-worth, actually, ironically, is one of the most effective ways of boosting self-esteem. When we're no longer pursuing self-esteem, but rather embracing a full understanding of our innate self-worth, then actually we tend to feel much more positive about ourselves. So this is really that crucial distinction. Self-worth is that unconditional friendship with yourself, recognizing you were born okay, you were born worthwhile. And these are not qualities you have to earn. They are qualities you're born with. Whereas self-esteem is always contingent and it requires external validation. I feel good about myself when I pass my exam, but what if you don't pass your exam? But even if you do pass your exam, if you are pursuing endlessly self-esteem, could you not always have got a better mark unless you get 100%? If you get 95, well, couldn't you have got 96 or 97 or 98? And so on. And Alan Watts, the philosopher, refers to this as the law of reverse effect. In the same way that insecurity is the result of trying to be secure, low self-esteem actually comes from pursuing self-esteem as something we have to earn, rather than embracing the philosophy of self-worth as something that we're born with. And typically, as I say, your self-esteem will grow when you stop chasing it, when you embrace instead the philosophy of unconditional self-acceptance. So I'm going to invite you to do this as a very quick experiential exercise. It will only take 5 minutes. An exercise involves you getting to a nice, comfortably relaxed position, and then imagine that you are the grown-up you looking down at the newborn you as a newborn child lying in a cot. So get into a nice, comfortably relaxed position, allow your eyes to gently close, and I'll talk you through the exercise, which I say just lasts a couple of minutes. So if you close your eyes and picture yourself as a newborn child lying in a cot. And as you look at yourself as a newborn child lying contentedly in your cot, get a really strong sense that you are fundamentally okay, that you are fine just as you are, that you are totally unique, and that this uniqueness gives you innate worth and value. And sense also that you don't need to come top in any assessments in order to be okay. You just are okay. And you don't need to be a size 0 or to have a super toned body and a six-pack in order to be okay. You just are okay. Just as trees come in all shapes and sizes, and there is no correct way to be a tree, so it is with people. And therefore, so it is with you. You were born okay. You were born worthwhile. You were born with innate worth and value. And these are not qualities you have to earn. They are qualities that you're born with. And since no one will ever perform surgery on you to take these qualities away, they are qualities you'll carry with you always, regardless of how much you earn or how many friends you have on Facebook. You will always be a work in progress, never the finished article, since that would require that no further improvement were possible, and there will always be room for improvement. Self-improvement is a journey, not a destination, and you will therefore never be perfect, but will always be fundamentally okay, fundamentally worthwhile. You will always have innate worth and value. And be aware also that since all of us are always works in progress, never the finished article, our imperfections add value. They don't take it away. If every person were perfect, then every individual would be replaceable by anybody else. But we're not. Our imperfections are what make us indispensable, irreplaceable. For we are all of us imperfect in our own ways. No one is universally gifted. Our imperfections are what make us unique. Just as in a mosaic, every piece of stone is imperfect, incomplete. And yet each piece is the only piece that can make its unique contribution to the total mosaic. In the same way, you are the only person who can fill the U-shaped hole in the mosaic of humanity. As the far from perfect Leonard Cohen once wrote, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So celebrate your imperfections. Accept yourself unconditionally as a work in progress, yet always fundamentally worthwhile, fundamentally okay, and absolutely fine, just as you are. Okay, so if you'd like to open your eyes and return yourself to the room you're in. The reason I do that exercise is that I'm really keen to get you to kind of experience it, not just intellectually, but experientially, that you were born okay. Every child is born okay. Every child is born worthwhile. And these are not qualities you have to earn. They are just your birthright. And no one ever empties you of those qualities. You have them always. So I'm not more okay if I talk well this evening than if I don't, because that would suggest I have to earn the right to be okay, and I don't. I was okay when I woke up this morning. I will be okay when I go to bed this evening. And how this talk goes can't possibly touch that. Now, that doesn't mean I don't care about the talk. Of course I care about it. But actually, because my self-worth is not at any point on the line this evening, it's a relatively low-stakes event, which means I can do it without being stressed or anxious, because I'm not making that mistake of thinking that in order to be okay, I have to deliver an outstanding talk. Because I'm okay regardless of how this talk goes. And recognizing that, I can just settle in and relax and enjoy it. So other important distinctions, the difference between other esteem and self-esteem. So other esteem is essentially the notion that we can only feel good about ourselves if other people feel good about us too. Again, you can see how this is a very fragile grip on feeling good about ourselves, because how people feel about us isn't entirely within our control. And other esteem and self-esteem, they have one thing in common. They're contingent, they're external, they rely on external validation. Whereas actually, if you build instead an unconditional friendship with yourself, based on a secure sense of your own self-worth, you can hold on to that, even if it feels that other people are not offering you their esteem I don't need other people's validation if I have a secure sense of my own worth. People who need extrinsic validation are actually indicating to the world that they have a very shaky grip on their own self-worth. Another important distinction between shame and guilt. So having a secure sense of self-worth is not arrogance, quite the opposite. It's accepting yourself as a work in progress, fundamentally flawed like everybody else, and fundamentally okay at the same time. And if we have a secure sense of self-worth, we know that we're okay, even while we are that work in progress. We are for sure going to make mistakes. We are for sure going to get stuff wrong now and again. And it's absolutely appropriate if we act in error that we experience guilt. Guilt is a simple recognition that we've acted badly or in error or we've done something wrong. Guilt is a positive emotion to experience because it's not about our character. It's about our behavior. It's about our actions. And because it's only ever about our behavior and our actions, we can, if necessary, apologize for our behavior or our actions, try to make it right, and offer recompense for any ills or wrongs that we've done. And guilt does not touch our sense of being worthwhile. Shame, on the other hand, is entirely different. Shame is the notion that because I've acted badly or I've acted wrongly, that's a reflection on my character. That makes me a bad person. So again, if we turn shame into guilt, we can see how our self-esteem will take a dip. If we have a secure sense of self-worth, we don't actually exaggerate guilt and turn it into shame. That tends to come from that pursuit of self-esteem through extrinsic external validation, which means that when we behave badly, we make that mistake of exaggerating that into a sense of being a bad person. So for sure, feel guilty if you've acted wrongly and do your best to make it right, but don't ever turn it into shame. Remember, if you were truly a bad person, you would only be capable of very bad acts. And that's probably not true of very many people at all. One of my concerns here as well is that we are, to some extent, raising children to pursue this extrinsic self-esteem. And in a pursuit of extrinsic self-esteem, we are at the risk of eroding their actually secure sense of self-worth. Quite a famous experiment here from Mark Lepper and David Green in the 1970s took two groups of youngsters who were both very keen on art, very keen particularly on drawing, but as well as painting and sculpting and the like, and divided these two highly interested in art groups into two sets. One set was then given rewards for the art that they produced. Another set was just encouraged to get on and create for its own sake. The group that was being rewarded for what they produced very quickly started arguing about their rewards, and it became much more about the rewards than about the art that they produced. Lots of arguments, lots of squabbling about so-and-so's got a better reward than I've got. Whereas the other group, who were just encouraged to draw for its own sake, carried on enjoying drawing. But even more perniciously, the group that were being rewarded, as soon as those rewards were withdrawn, stopped drawing altogether, because it was just now about the reward. So it's really important that we recognize this. And if you are a parent of A-level students, tempted to buy them a car if they're past their A-levels, you should think carefully about this, because actually, as a university lecturer, I met a lot of students who were bought cars by their parents for passing their A-levels. But at university, when those rewards were withdrawn, they found it very difficult to motivate themselves, because it was no longer about doing it for themselves. It was about doing it to get some reward. So a number of key shifts have been identified in helping us to develop self-worth and overcome imposter syndrome. I really like this quote at the top from Carl Rogers. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change. So accepting yourself as you are doesn't mean that you think, well, that's it, I'm just going to leave it there. It means start with where you are and then enjoy the journey of self-development from where you are, recognizing that you are okay right at the start of that journey. It kind of reminds me of the old joke about someone who asks a drunk for directions, and the drunk says, well, I wouldn't start from here. Well, of course, here is the only place you can ever start from, and it's the best place to start anyway. One of the key shifts is from assessing to asserting. So when we are pursuing extrinsic self-esteem, we're always assessing ourselves. How am I doing? How am I coming across? How am I talking? I wonder if this person likes me. I wonder if this person thinks of me. But actually, when we stop doing that, when we stop assessing ourselves every moment, and just start asserting our right to be, fundamentally okay, even while we are that work in progress. When we start asserting our right to be from a secure sense of self-worth, then actually we don't need to keep assessing ourselves in quite the same way. And we can stop being unkind to ourselves, even if we have a bad day, even if we make mistakes. We don't need to be judging ourselves, because we can develop that unconditional friendship with ourselves. We can just be just as kind and patient and tolerant with ourselves as we would be with any friend who might be struggling in a particular area. There's a famous American psychologist who once said that if you were to go into a restaurant and hear two people talking to each other the way that many people talk to themselves, you'd probably call the police. And they've kind of got a point, because this comes from this lack of secure self-worth and lack of friendship with ourselves that we really need to be developing. Next shift is from self-reproach to self-acceptance. Of course, having high self-worth, a secure sense of worth, your own worth, doesn't mean that you don't experience on occasion some negative emotions, some sadness, some disappointment, maybe a sense of isolation or frustration. But when you experience those things from a secure base of self-worth, you don't beat yourself up about having those feelings. You accept yourself with those feelings, and you don't slip into self-reproach and judging yourself for having those feelings. So self-acceptance means that occasionally, of course, negative feelings will arise, they will show up, but we don't need to add to them by beating ourselves up, by reproaching ourselves for having them. But there is an important difference between acceptance and resignation. Acceptance means that actually we accept things the way they are when we can't change them. Resignation is much more negative. Resignation normally is accompanied by a feeling of loss or a sadness and giving up. Acceptance isn't about giving up. It's recognizing the way things are, but it doesn't require us, of course, to tolerate circumstances which should not be tolerated. On the contrary, in fact, when we accept ourselves and our needs, we are more able to calmly make requests of other people and to calmly state what's okay for us and what is not. A lot of people think of self-acceptance in terms of permission. So, for example, rather than thinking of accepting the need to rest, we might instead frame it as, I give myself permission to rest. So watch out for self-reproach and see if you can turn it into self-acceptance. Another useful shift, shifting from should to could. Whenever we use the word should in our self-talk, we are implying that we're not okay as we are, that there's something wrong with us, fundamentally wrong with us. But if we were to make certain changes, we'd be okay. But actually, you're okay right now. And whenever you use the word should, you are kind of saying that you don't measure up, you're not enough. This is a major problem, actually, in coaching. A lot of coaches talk, I think, quite unhelpfully about this notion that I can help you be the best possible version of yourself. The suggestion being that you're not okay as you are now. Or they create this mythology that they can help you create this optimized self. If you think about it, creating your optimized self, if you were to do that, what would you do next? It would be really frustrating, wouldn't it? Imagine being your optimized self at age 30. What would you do next? Life would be really quite empty, wouldn't it? So we should give up this notion of the optimized self, that there's some better version of you out there, and start with where we are and accepting ourselves as we are, and turn those should statements into could statements, which lets us know that actually what we're talking about here is a choice without judgment. So if we have the notion, I should exercise more, we could turn it into, I could exercise more, and I could. And actually what I might do is set my alarm a little bit earlier tomorrow and run before I take a shower. Rather than I should go to bed earlier, which again suggests somehow we're wrong, we're deficient, I could go to bed earlier, I could. And I think I probably will this evening. Rather than I should eat healthier, I could eat healthier. I should drink less alcohol becomes I could drink less alcohol. So it puts us much more in control of our lives whenever we turn a should statement into a could statement. So again, let's do this as a quick experiential exercise. If you've got a pen and paper, you might find it useful to jot this down. If not, you can just do it in your mind's eye as a thought experiment. Think of a statement that begins with I should, and write it down or just flesh it out for yourself. For example, I should call my parents more, but it could be I should drink less alcohol, I should exercise more, I should be a better brother or sister, I should study harder, whatever it is. Any I should statement. And when you've got your I should statement underneath that, or just next in your mind's eye, come up with an I ought to statement. For example here, I ought to exercise more. But again, it could be I ought to eat more fresh fruit. I ought to stop smoking. I ought to talk to my neighbours more than I do. So you've got an I should statement and an I ought to statement. And then underneath that, finally, an I must statement. Something you feel you absolutely have to do. For example, I must pass my exams. I must get my bonus this year. I must achieve my promotion. And if you've got those three statements, a should, an ought, and a must, read them through a few times in your mind and pay attention to any feelings that are generated as you do that. And typically, whenever our self-talk is around what we should, ought, or must do, we start generating feelings of guilt, feeling of failure, feeling anxious, and so on. All of these, of course, feelings of imposter syndrome, that we don't measure up, we're not sufficient as we are. Fortunately, though, because we are the ones having these conversations with ourselves, we can change them. So actually, if you've written them down, if you cross out your I should statement, and instead of should, turn it this time into I want to. For example, I want to call my parents more. And then your I ought to statement becomes I would prefer to. And your I must statement becomes I would like to. So rather than I should call my parents more, I want to call my parents more. I do. I'll probably call them in the morning. Rather than I ought to exercise more, I would prefer to exercise more. I would, and I wonder how I might do that. And rather than I must pass my exams, which is going to generate a lot of stress and anxiety, I would like to pass my exams, though I recognize there's actually no law of the universe says I must. And if you read through your revised statements, want, prefer, and like statements, typically you'll find that the feelings have softened considerably from when they were should, ought, and must statements. So again, we are less in the grip of imposter syndrome every time we turn should, ought, and must statements into want, prefer, and like statements. So this is building on the notion of happiness as a choice. It's one of my favorite pictures in the world, this one. And I guess it's a school sports day, and the chap on the left has come first, but he's furious that the chap on the right, who's come third, is loving his moment. Yes, made it onto the podium. And which one of those two do you think has the most secure sense of self-worth? And actually, it's really quite clear. And who's loving his moment? And one of the things that this reminds me of is at the end of every Olympic Games, there's a number of studies done on the elite athletes, a number of kind of well-being type interventions and studies. And what they almost invariably find is at the end of every Olympics Games, bronze medalists are a good deal happier than silver medalists, which is kind of curious if you think about it, because the silver medalist has beaten the bronze medalist, but the bronze medalist typically is happier. So you might ask yourself why that is. Why would a bronze medalist be happier than a silver medalist when the silver medalist has beaten them? And the suggestion is that they actually just say different things to themselves about this. Typically, the silver medalist will be saying to themselves, damn, just missed out on the gold. And the bronze medalist will be saying, yes, going home with a medal, made it onto the podium. So how we talk to ourselves is crucial, absolutely crucial to setting down imposter syndrome and enjoying our moment. So the next shift from being interesting, interested. A lot of people who struggle with imposter syndrome also struggle with social anxiety. And social anxiety almost always comes from wrongly focusing on being interesting. So you're in a crowd and you're making conversations and you think that you have to be interesting. But the great news is you don't. You just have to be interested in the other person. You can ask them questions about their lives. They'll love telling you. And the ironic thing is when you stop focusing on being interesting and focus instead on being interested, you can relax because there's no pressure on you whatsoever. And ironically, you make a much better impression, and people find you much more interesting when you give up trying to be interesting and focus instead on being interested in others. People whose focus is on being interesting invariably talk too much. They butt in and they're listening always for a chance to get in and seize the agenda and take it off onto themselves. Whereas people who are focused on being interested can relax in social situations. It's not all about them. And they will ask other people about their lives. And they will love telling them about their lives. And they will come across much better, ironically, than the people who are trying to be interesting. So if you struggle with social situations, just shift your focus from being interesting to being interested, and you'll find that most of that pressure is eased. It is important when talking about imposter syndrome to also acknowledge the role of social media. And this is quite a famous study now by the Happiness Research Institute that took two groups of participants who visit Facebook daily and split them into two groups. Around 1,100 people in the experiment. And then of the two groups, one group just carried on using Facebook as before, another group stopped altogether. Within just 1 week, their scores had changed on a whole battery of inventories. Life satisfaction, for example, the group that were using Facebook had an average life satisfaction score of 7.75. The group that had stopped using Facebook scored an average of 8.12, a significant improvement in the course of just 1 week. And non-users were also less worried, less lonely, less stressed compared to users, and also found to be more enthusiastic and more decisive. In terms of imposter syndrome, of course, this is significant because what people typically who are daily users of Facebook are doing is comparing their flawed, imperfect lives with the phony, perfect Facebook lives of their friends and others, and feeling that therefore they don't measure up. So my take on this is actually it's very important we start seeing social media in much the same way that we see alcohol. Used sparingly, used occasionally, and not every day, it can be a great source of fun. Used excessively, used every day, used throughout every day, it would take far more than it can ever give. So limit your time on social media. So just coming to the end now, the three core attitudes of people with high self-worth. So this is really what people with high self-worth demonstrate. The first thing is unconditional self-acceptance. I accept myself not as I might be in the future, not as I will be when I hit my target weight or pass my exams or get that romantic relationship or anything else. I accept myself unconditionally as I am right now, right now. Secondly, unconditional other acceptance. If I'm going to claim the right to be fundamentally okay, fundamentally worthwhile, even though I'm a work in progress, then actually I need to allow other people to claim the same. So unconditional other acceptance means I don't necessarily like everything, of course, that everybody does, but I don't need to condemn anyone as irredeemably a bad person. Although for sure, I might on occasions need to criticize their behavior, I won't necessarily need to criticize the person's character. I accept that if I'm okay whilst a work in progress, then I actually grant that same permission to others I encounter too. What that means is you don't make yourself angry or furious about other people because you're not making judgments about other people's character. So for example, one of the things that I love doing right now is going out for walks. It's one of the things that lots of people have started doing during lockdown, of course. Now, it might be that I'm out for a walk and I'm lucky enough to live quite close to a cliff top and I see a dog walk and the dog walker doesn't clear up after their dog. Now, if I don't practice unconditional other acceptance, I might ruin that walk for myself by making all sorts of judgments about that dog walker's character. But actually, I don't have to because I've gone out for a pleasant walk and I can still have a pleasant walk. For sure, I disapprove of his behavior, but I don't need to generate huge amounts of fury and anger by making all sorts of character inferences from that behavior. And the third and final one, unconditional life acceptance. Now and again, life is going to throw you a low ball. Stuff happens, and it's stuff very often that isn't what we choose and what we want. But sometimes it's stuff that happens we really can't avoid. And so accepting it is just part of living well with it. At the moment, I've got quite a sore back. It's a condition that seems to run in my family, and it seems that I'm probably going to be stuck with it. Now, I could beat myself up about it. I could upset myself about it. But actually, that would not be practicing unconditional life acceptance. So actually, I welcome it as a friend. I welcome it. I have a relationship with my bad back. And it also fails to pass the test of awfulness. So one of the key ideas here is that a situation is only truly awful if no good can possibly come of it. And having a bad back fails that test because I've actually learned self-hypnosis for back pain to quite a significant and successful extent. I would never have learned that, but for having back pain, clearly. And I'm really pleased that I've learned it. It's been a really useful skill and one I've been able to share with other people. So actually it fails the test of awfulness, which is quite important. And actually I make friends with it. So typically my back gets really stiff overnight, and when I wake up, it's particularly sore. But rather than cursing that, I actually go through a bit of a routine where you might remember some of those James Bond films where there's a villain stroking a cat going, "Ah, Mr. Bond, I've been expecting you." And I kind of have a similar routine with my back. "Ah, bad back, I've been expecting you. Thought you'd show up. And you have. Welcome. Now on with my day." So we can accept whatever life throws at us, because sometimes we really have no alternative. And we don't necessarily need to get involved in some sort of tug of war with those situations that life throws at us. Sometimes it's the healthiest thing to do is just to put the rope down rather than endlessly going to battle with it. So finally, how many self-worth coaches does it take to change a light bulb? So cheesy joke, really. Of course, the answer is just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So coming to a talk or listening to a talk on self-worth and imposter syndrome, it's kind of the start, but it's putting it into practice that's going to make the difference. So thank you ever so much if you have been for listening. And I'm very keen to make myself available for questions. Thank you.
Oh, um, thank you so much, Joan. I have to say, I genuinely so enjoyed your talk. I was just so focused on it, and it has helped me personally so much, as well as not just as a host of the summit. So, thank you so much.
So
um,
shall I stop sharing? Is that the best thing to do?
yes, please. Yeah. Would you like to, yeah, your contact slides, it's at the end of the slides, right? So I'll probably share those slides with the, on the website afterwards. So yes, we already have a couple of questions coming through, but please keep having your questions through so John can answer it. John, actually, if that's okay, I selfishly ask a question from me first, if that's all right.
Sure, yeah.
So I have also been a journey of sort of kind of making up with my own self-worth and self-esteem. And as you said on the slides, I find myself to feel freer and a little bit more confident because I care less about what others think. The thing is, I still care.
Mm.
If that makes sense. I still way less care now, but I still care. And I have my inner child going, when other people compliment me or they are laughing at my jokes because I'm a bit of a clown. So how does it relate? Like, can that be sorry, is that aspect still healthy, or is it just a kind of innate human thing to be liked by others, or is it also related to a little bit of lower self-worth as well?
No, not at all. So praise and what are called in psychology, particularly positive strokes, are always welcome. The key thing is that you shouldn't pursue them, but you should for sure enjoy them when they come. So it's not that. So if you think about it, so I've spoken for a little over half an hour, and I'm pleased to have done that. And if I get some positive feedback, then that's great. I'm not going to say it, isn't it? You know, everyone enjoys that. It's a positive stroke. It's a form of recognition. But if I don't, then that's okay as well. I don't need to lose too much sleep. So it's not that you don't care, because people who don't care what others think tend to be narcissists, and they tend to be a bit Trump-like and just go around causing huge offense and not caring. So it's not about not caring, it's about actually not having this kind of urgent and desperate need for validation. But for sure, positive feedback's always nice.
Thanks so much, John. We have questions keep coming through, so we will go through them all. So we have one from, if it's not healthy to aim for confirmation or validation from others, then why are we doing anything? What, therefore, is the point of life?
So, okay, so it's a little bit like, I mean, what is the point of life? We haven't really got time for that because it's quite a big question. It's a little bit like the kind of activities that signal low self-worth would be someone who goes to give blood, which is a very good thing to do, but then has to post it on Facebook that they've done it. Or someone who maybe runs a marathon, maybe raises money for charity, but there's lots and lots of posts. Look what I've done. Look how good I am. But actually what they're saying is, I feel a bit empty inside and I need some validation to fill me up. One of the metaphors that some psychologists use is the nurturing tank. So when we're growing up, if we're lucky, we have parents who nurture us and nurture us sufficiently, and they show us kindness and compassion and support. And then we enter adulthood with a nurturing tank that is pretty full. And if our nurturing tank is pretty full, it means we had enough nurturing. We don't need excessive amounts of it, but we need it at times if we feel tired or exhausted, or if we feel low, or if we feel that life's an effort, then it's nice for sure to receive some nurturing. But for the most part, our nurturing tank is full. Other people, unfortunately, don't get enough of that nurturing growing up. That's what the evidence is. Either their parents weren't around enough for them, they were too busy with their own lives, or else they were rather critical or severe or harsh, and always finding fault. And people who have that experience will often go through life with a nurturing tank, which is either kind of empty or half empty or leaky. And they will be searching out external validation a lot of the time to try to make up for the gap that they feel inside. But actually becoming their own best friend is a much more secure solution to what they feel. Because once you start being able to nurture yourself and recognize your own innate self-worth, then you can feel good about yourself, even if other people maybe haven't invited you to that party. If you feel you have to be invited to the party, or you have to get 100 likes on your Facebook post to be okay, it's a very precarious grip you've got on feeling okay.
Oh, that's really helpful, John. Thank you. And thank you for the anonymous attendee for asking the question. That was a quite philosophical one and always welcomed. And another one from another anonymous attendee. Great talk. Thank you. Will the recording be available to us? And if we want to run an imposter syndrome session in our workplace, any tips, or are you available? Actually, can I answer the first bit of it? So thank you so much for the feedback, and the recording will be available on the website and on YouTube, so you can share it back with your colleagues, and John will answer it in a minute, but we will definitely share John's email address. So if you are planning to run an imposter syndrome session in your workplace, which will be actually really helpful for many colleagues, please do contact John directly. John, do you have any tips for this attendee, for like any tips on the workplace sort of thing briefly?
Well, only to reaffirm what you said. I mean, I'm happy to share the slides if people are comfortable just presenting it themselves. By all means, you can do that with my permission and my blessing. Equally, if you would like to email me, then by all means do. And if I can be available, then I for sure like to help.
Thank you, John. And we have another one called Nikki. Do you see self-compassion as the same as self-worth, or is this something different in your view?
It is slightly different. So self-compassion is clearly linked with self-worth. But for me, actually, self-worth goes a little bit deeper. So self-compassion is kind of being kind to yourself. Whereas self-worth is kind of it's acknowledging that sense of being okay, but on that journey of self-development. So you're okay regardless of where you are on that journey. You know, you're born okay, you're fundamentally worthwhile, your deficiencies, if you like, in terms of what other people might point out, are actually an important part of you. Self-compassion is kindness to yourself, so not beating yourself up, but self-worth goes a bit deeper than that. So for me, one way I practice it is to remind myself that I'm okay when I wake up every morning, and I'm okay when I go to bed every night, and nothing that happens between those 2 points can touch that. But I even sometimes go further and say, I was born okay and I will die okay, and nothing that happens between those 2 points can touch that either. Self-compassion is being kind to yourself. For me, self-worth goes even deeper, and it's just a philosophical point about all human beings are born worthwhile, and since I'm a member of the human race, that includes me too.
That's just, as you say that, you don't know how that takes loads of pressure off my chest as well. And I'm sure that's the what everyone else joining today might be feeling. We have another question in the chat. What are the main ways of recognizing imposter syndrome in someone else? For example, a team member or direct reports. What an interesting question.
It's an interesting question. Very often, it can be that slight sense of anxiety that people have, particularly if they're asked to lead a session, if they're asked to chair a meeting, if they're asked to volunteer their thoughts, because some of the key messages people get which lead to the development of imposter syndrome. It's not okay to think for yourself. If you are raised being told that you're stupid, for example, and unfortunately some people are, or that what you have to say has no value or merit, then people will tend to blush if they're asked to speak. They will typically not contribute. They won't put themselves forward for a leadership position. And so you can kind of spot it in those ways. There's also avoiding eye contact. That you can spot with some people, that they will, when people are going around the room, so let's hear from everybody who would like to go first, they straight away stare at their shoes as if they have nothing to say. They also tend to use phrases which are often referred to as discounting. So if they do make a contribution, they'll discount it before they make it. So they'll probably say things like, well, I'm sure this would never work, but we could do this. Or this is probably a silly idea, but we could do this. Or I'm probably silly for asking, but does anyone know this? So listen out for those discounting questions. And actually, if you're the manager, then it's really important to challenge them and say, actually, that's not a silly question. And you probably weren't the only one thinking of it. And actually, that suggestion you made that you thought wouldn't be any good, it's probably the best suggestion we've heard so far.
That's really interesting, especially the discounting statements, because I sometimes use it, and I have noticed that some other team members use it too. So that sounds like a good, sporting sort of statement. And before we answer Joy's question, we have some feedback from Nikki. Thank you. I really enjoyed the talk. I felt quite emotional when doing the baby in the crib exercise. Well, thanks, Nikki, for sharing this, because I didn't feel emotional, but I felt almost smiley, because I don't think I ever felt that or spoken to myself in that way. And hearing you saying that, everything is okay and I can be imperfect and that's just completely fine, made me smile, made me feel less pressured, if that makes sense. So thanks, Nikki, for sharing it. We have a question from Joy. I actually, I know Joy, and Joy actually, this is not fun, but Joy brings me joy, honestly, and happiness whenever I speak to her. So let's see this question from Joy. Could you repeat, John, what is the difference between low self-esteem and low self-confidence?
So they're clearly linked again. So self-esteem is something which is contingent on external validation. And clearly that can lead to a lack of self-confidence, but the two things are slightly different. So confidence is a slightly separate issue to esteem. So, and in a sense, it's possible to have high self-worth, but in a certain situation to lack confidence. So if you're learning a new skill, then you might not have a lot of confidence, but still have high self-worth. So for example, if I was to take up skateboarding, which I'm not going to do at my age, but if I was to take it up, I probably wouldn't have much confidence. And I'd probably be very tentative about my going on a skateboard, but it doesn't need to impact my self-worth because I'm okay whether I get the hang of this or I don't. So, but self-esteem would be different in that if I attach self-esteem to being able to skateboard and I'm not able to do it, or I do it too tentatively, or I keep falling off, then I will feel badly about myself. So it is possible to have high self-worth, but lack confidence in certain areas because none of us are universally gifted, as I said.
Oh, that's such a great answer, actually. Thank you so much, John. And we have another question from Robin. Do you have any tips specifically for overcoming imposter syndrome in the workplace and being able to speak up when meeting with the senior members? That's a tough one, the pressure. So do you have any tips on that, John?
Yeah, it's not dissimilar to some of the work I used to do with medical students when I worked at the university. And one of the most important things to say to the medical students is you are okay on the way into that exam room. And you are okay on the way out. And how you perform in that exam doesn't have to touch that. Even if it happens that you can't answer some of the questions, you are still fundamentally okay. Even if it ends up that you're going to have to resit that exam or maybe even repeat the whole year, you are still okay. Now, if you go into that exam with that attitude, if you can't answer the first question, you're not going to go to pieces. You're going to just say, okay, I can't answer that one, but I am okay. But there's a gap in my knowledge. I'm going to move on to the next question. And you're not defeated by it. If you're attaching self-worth to it, you're going to see that you can't answer that first question. Oh my God, I'm never going to get through this. Now, it's a little bit like that also in just a regular workplace. when you're going to meet that senior leader or that member of the board, the CEO, you are okay on the way into that meeting, and you're going to be okay on the way out of it. And nothing that happens in that meeting need ever or could ever touch that. That will allow you to relax into the meeting, because your self-worth isn't on the line. Where people get anxious, it's because they put their self-worth on the line, but you actually don't have to.
That's really interesting, Joan. Just a follow-up question on that, please, if I may. So let's imagine that you went with I'm okay, even though I make great mistakes there with all the directors, and you have you messed up, and then you could see the board directors, your line managers, everyone go, how can we have someone like that in our company? Oh, and then you come out of the meeting. Is there any sort of instant tricks you can get back to your confident sort of self before you made those mistakes?
There is a self-hypnosis that I like to use. Now, it's got a name that I wouldn't give it. It's called the Circle of Excellence. If people are interested, you can just Google Circle of Excellence and you'll see lots of people do it. It's a self-hypnosis. Essentially, the way it works is you imagine a circle on the floor in front of you. And it's a technique that I've used over the years, and mine is quite big and it's deep red and it kind of shimmers. And if I ever feel the need to, and it's not something I've done recently, but if I feel the need that actually my self-worth is taking a dip, then actually I'm no longer feeling good about myself, I just put the circle down. It's an imaginary one. I step into it and I take a good deep breath. And I breathe that quality out of the circle back into my body. And I'll take 2 or 3 deep breaths until I can actually feel that sense of being okay, coming right up my legs, into my belly, into my chest, neck, back, head, shoulders, and I've got it. And I can step out with it again. So if you Google Circle of Excellence, there are a number of ways of doing it, but that's just a really nice self-hypnosis. Now, it might be, of course, that there are consequences for not doing a great presentation to the CEO or whatever it is. And it might be that you even need to think about doing something else for your career, but that's fine, because you're still okay. You're still okay. It's a little bit like, there's a really good book, The Inner Game of Golf, by Tim Galway, and he makes the point that the difference between golfers who win championships and golfers who don't isn't necessarily their golfing skills. In fact, typically it isn't their golfing skills. It's the fact that some people, if they're playing an 18-hole round of golf, they're playing really well. It comes on to the 7th or 8th hole, and what should be a par 4, all of a sudden it takes them 8 strokes. And they then start saying to themselves stuff around, well, I'm just a loser, I'm useless, I can't play this game anymore. And of course, they're still thinking about that 8th hole during the 9th hole, the 10th hole, the 11th hole, the 12th hole, and their game is going to go to pieces. Whereas the champion might have that very wasteful experience on hole 8, but actually doesn't attach their self-worth. They simply say, okay, I played that hole very badly. And then they put an imaginary line on the floor in front of them. And they might rant at themselves for a little while. You know, why on earth did I miss that? But as soon as they've stepped over that imaginary line, it's gone. And they're 100% focused on the next hole. And people who can do that, so their self-worth doesn't take a dip at all. They just played that hole badly. They're not a bad golfer. They're the ones that win championships.
Love it, Joe. Thank you. We just before we answer these questions, they are keep coming in the Q&A chat. There is this lovely feedback from Robin. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this session, and it's definitely changed my thought process. We are great to hear that, Robin. And we have a question from Margarita. You already just recommended the book, but this is quite related to it. So Margaret asks, what books or researchers on imposter syndrome would you recommend for further reading?
I think probably the number one would be a book by John Nyland, who's an Irish writer, and it's called The Self-Worth Safari. And I think it's very accessible. It's very well researched. It's a good read, and it just makes so much sense.
That's great. Thank you for that, Joan. And we have another question from anonymous attendee. Do you think there is any skew towards men versus women when it comes to imposter syndrome? Or do men just hide it better?
It's a very interesting one. The evidence suggests it's around a 70-30 split, that women are around 70% of people with imposter syndrome and men around 30%. 30%, of course, is quite significant. It's quite a significant portion. I do suspect it's more common in women. I think it's not just that men are hiding it. I do think it's more, and it's in a way you would expect it in a society which is still to some degree patriarchal, in which uh, yeah, in which power is not distributed equally. But it's also, of course, about social class. I mean, and if you take the difference between imposter syndrome and entitlement syndrome, you know, the simple fact that that one school, Eton, has produced 19 prime ministers, and the school I went to hasn't produced any. So you see, it never occurred to me genuinely when I was at school that I could become prime minister, because people who go to this school never become prime minister. But if you go to Eton, you know for sure you can become prime minister because they've already had 19 of them. And when you look at the sense of confidence that Boris Johnson has, it's kind of the opposite of imposter syndrome. Most people, I think, would be thinking, me, prime minister, seriously? But actually, he just kind of assumes that it's a birthright almost. And so I think for sure, it's not just about gender. Social class and the life script that we're encouraged to write for ourselves is a big aspect. But I do think in a world in which power is unequally distributed between the sexes, we would expect women to experience it more.
That's sad, but that does make sense, Joan. Thank you for that. We have one more question in the chat, and because we have about only 4 more minutes, if any of you listening in tonight has a burning question, but if you feel shy, don't be shy. Just pop it in the chat um, for Joan to answer your question. So we have this question. Do you have any tips, Joan, for getting over not knowing the answer to a question in an interview session, for example? That's tough. This can often send one off track and start thinking very negatively about oneself.
Hmm. So I think the key thing is that even if you don't answer a question in an interview correctly, you don't need to feel bad about yourself. So your interview skills might need a polish, but you don't need a polish. You know, you are absolutely fine, remember. I think sometimes, in my experience, interviewers really appreciate honesty. So one of the things I remember about my own interview at Southampton University, so 14 years ago, well, two things I remember. One is that I turned up late through no fault of my own. I was stuck in traffic and I couldn't get there on time. But even though I arrived late, I wasn't flustered because I was still okay. And actually part of what I had to do was to teach doctors to stay calm in a crisis. And so arriving late, but without sweating or rushing, or I apologize, of course, for my action of arriving late, but not for my character. That was important. But actually answering directly a question, when they asked, why do you want to come particularly to this university? I could, of course, have gone to its mission statement, its value statement. And I just said, because it's the nearest university. And they all laughed. And you could kind of see that they just appreciated that they'd been waffled to by all the other candidates. And here was someone who was telling it like it was. So sometimes in an interview, if you don't know the answer to a question, you can just say, you've caught me out. I don't know the answer to that question.
That's a great tip. I hope the person who asked the question can take it away and use it next time when you don't know the answer. John, I know we have a couple of minutes of questions, but as your fan, can I just ask a question? So, how did you acquire this unlimited self-worth yourself?
So I think in part, it's a really interesting question. So I've been a counsellor for over 30 years. And of course, one of the things you do when you're working as a counsellor is you explain certain things about self-worth and how you don't have to earn it, you have it. And I think every time I explain it to a counselling client, I'm kind of re-indoctrinating myself with this same message. And I think I've kind of indoctrinated myself, because the more that I can, particularly when I was a school counsellor and working with children with low self-esteem and low self-worth who might have eating disorders or be self-harming or all sorts of stuff, then actually encouraging them to feel okay about themselves right now They don't have to pass exams to be okay, they just are okay. The more I was saying it to other people, I kind of just kept getting the message myself, and it was being reflected back at me. What I would also say is that script that I developed, the looking at yourself as a child, I have read out in a number of primary schools and assemblies, and it's just such a useful antidote to all those self-esteem messages that schools very often promote instead.
That's great to hear, John. So it sounds like if we keep repeating this this dialogue, or if we keep saying it to ourselves and others, we may acquire unlimited self-worth one day. So
Or even better, explain it to other people. So if you have children, explain it to them. If you have a partner, explain it to your partner. If you have friends, explain it to your friends. When you explain it to someone else, you are also explaining it to yourself again.
that's right. I'll try with my husband in the next in a minute. Oh, so it's 8 o'clock, and John, you have my unlimited gratitude. Oh, I know you are supervision. I do. So thank you so much for joining
That's
this
my pleasure.
and becoming a speaker pro bono. I really appreciate. We are having loads of comments coming through in the chat. Thanking you for this. It's amazing. And I just wanted to say, oh, sorry, I just pressed something wrong whilst saving the chat. So just want to say that I will share John's slides, and then also John's recording from today will be uploaded to our YouTube You Are Not Alone channel with John's personal contact details. So any of you who'd like to ask John to deliver this training for your organization, please to get in touch. As you see, John's sessions always amazing. It's really inspiring. So just want to say, as parts of this You Are Not Alone session, our next session is on Wednesday, 7 p.m. and it's to uncover your purpose, delivered by another amazing speaker, Steve, who is the founder of Menable. John, do you have anything you would like to say to the audience before you end the meeting for today?
Thanks so much for your attention. It's been a real pleasure, a real privilege, and I hope you found it helpful. I hope you found it worthwhile. And yeah, by all means, if you've got questions you didn't get to ask, you can drop me a line and I will get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining tonight. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks so much. Can I just check? Do you want me to press end now?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye.